Welcome to the Brass Junkies, a podcast from the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network featuring interviews with the world's greatest brass players by two thoroughly average ones, Lance LaDuke and myself, Andrew Hitz. Today's episode features our former colleague from Boston Brass, horn player, prolific arranger, and all-around swell guy, J.D. Shaw. This was recorded in early 2014, right after our brass recording project recording session, but we're just finally getting around to sharing it with the world. J.D. talks about everything from arranging to traveling the world with a brass quintet. Next. Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Brass Junkies featuring myself, Andrew Hitz, and Lance LaDuke. How are you this evening, Mr. LaDuke?
I'm doing just fine. Great to be here. This will be a lot of fun.
Fantastic. We are going to feature a guest on each episode of the podcast, and tonight's first guest, we called a friend because we weren't able to get anyone influential or important, so we have decided to interview Mr. J.D. Shaw, who is our former colleague in Boston Brass. How are you, Mr. J.D.?
I'm good. So I'm the first junkie, huh?
You are the first junkie.
The first junkie.
Yeah. All right.
It is an honor.
You can put that on your resume, and I will expect it. So we're just going to ask you some questions. JD, of course, is a very prolific brass writer for all different kinds of brass. He probably got the best known right out of the gate by writing the arrangements for the Boston Brass, which all three of us are former members of. And I was speaking to Sam Palafian the other day, and actually Sam was called you probably the most prolific brass writer of all time. So he also said a bunch of mean stuff just to keep you right-sized, but I'll share that with you offline.
Well,
Does he owe you money? What was that?
probably that's what it is.
And just to put in a little bit of a plug, we just got through. Lance and I have started a project called the Brass Recording Project, and we just finished our first ever set of recording sessions for that, and we decided to put a quintet together, which featured the three of us, and also Rich Kelly, the former lead trumpet player from Boston Brass, and Kevin Gibo from the Army Band here in D.C., where I live. And we decided to start by recording some of the brass quintet arrangements of Mr. J.D. Shaw. So that is henceforth, I don't even know the difference between those two, but that is why we are interviewing him first, since we were just playing a bunch of his music, and we're both huge fans of your music. So can you tell us when you first got started writing for brass?
I think it was actually in high school when I was marching in the drum corps there in Houchin, Kansas, in Skyriders, and I just became fascinated with how they would take music from another genre and put it into the drum corps. And then, so I just started playing around with tunes and things, and occasionally my band director would humor me by playing something and show me how bad at it I really was. But then I just kept kind of writing, and whenever I listen to music, I kind of always imagine it for something, for another genre, another ensemble, or something like that. You listen to someone say, "Hey, this would sound good with this instrumentation," or things like that. So I think that's how I got going. I just remember always listening to Larry Kirshner's arrangements for Skyriders and just thinking, man, how did he do that? And so I loved getting the scores and checking that out. I know it's kind of geeky, but I thought that was pretty cool at the time.
So when you were writing the charts in the beginning, was it all longhand, or were you using program software by then? The dates are mixed up in my head. I don't know.
No, there wasn't any. At the time, I didn't have any software or anything like that. I don't think I started using computer software to write until around 1989, and right around then.
So this, I guess, I mean, now when you write, you can get some kind of rough idea of what something's going to sound like by having either the MIDI or those the programs that have the sampled sounds. But what was the process like, or how did it change when you would write this thing that you heard in your head, or maybe played on the piano, and then what was that process like to have to wait and then hear it live, and what kind of differences did you go through?
Well, at first it was amazing how it sounded nothing like I thought it would. So the learning curve was pretty steep, and I remember finding Canon orchestration book at a garage sale, and picking that up. I think I bought it for like 50 cents, and I started reading the thing, and I started learning about the different instruments, and how to write them in certain ranges and how to voice lead them and things like that. And that started helping me kind of hone in uh, what I wanted things to sound like. Also, my band director and other people would look at my things and say, "Oh, by the way, there's no way this is ever going to work." um, and so, a lot of trial and error, mostly error. I think at the beginning, for every one arrangement that sounded good, I probably had 30 that were terrible. But I just kept at it, kept trying to get better at it. I looked at a lot of scores. I remember being like in pet band and going up to my band director's stand and looking at the charts and seeing how things were written. Also started learning a lot of the different instruments just kind of in my off time. I'd start playing trumpet or trombone or clarinet and saying, what does this instrument feel like or sound like in this range or this range? And I felt like if I was going to write for things, just having a cursory knowledge of the instruments was important. So
Well,
not
that's
that
all
I'm
I've got, but that's on my main axe.
not that I'm good on any of those instruments, but I did try to get a little bit more familiar with them, and that was fun.
So, what is the most difficult brass instrument to write for, I guess, when you were first starting out? Like, which instrument did you maybe have misconceptions about what was going to sound good?
I think. Hmm, I think the first thing that occurred to me was how different the trombone sounded on a lot of things than I thought they would. First off, from a tonal standpoint, because it really is in the scheme of brass instrument, it really does have, I think, the most unique sound. And I certainly don't say that offensively, though some might take it. But it was amazing to me the difference of color that instrument had, and I would write something that was slurred, and it would, especially with younger players, would come out sounding very differently, very portamento, or sometimes a lot more tongue than I think they had anticipated. So that was the first thing that I realized, was that the learning curve on the slur technique of trombone was quite steep. Um, and then the next thing I think was the tuba, realizing that the what I thought would sound very bass and fundamental wouldn't sound that way unless it was in a certain range. I felt like if I got the tuba above like an E or an F in the treble clef or in the bass clef staff, it started losing that fundamental bass quality. It became kind of more soloistic, and so then I quickly realized that if I needed the guts to the ensemble, I needed to write things just a little bit lower. But that was all fun stuff to learn. I mean, just to say, oh, okay, now you get the light comes on, and you're able to understand how things work just a little bit better. It opens up a lot of doors for more writing.
As Andrew mentioned, well, I guess through Sam, you're known as being very prolific. Do you have any idea on? I mean, not even just quintet. Do you have any idea how many arrangements you've done in the time you've been writing?
Whoa. um, I don't know. I've always been a pretty bad insomniac, and so one of the things that I do when I'm up at night is I write, and it's also a great stress relief for me. So, yeah, I guess there's a therapeutic element to it, and I guess I need a lot of therapy. So, uh, so,
Wrong
so
podcast, dude.
so I mean, it probably is, I would say probably as close to 1,000 different charts that I've written over the years, just for different ensembles and things like that.
That's mind-boggling. So over like 20 years, is it? Or it's probably a little more than that, I guess.
Yeah, I probably started when I was like 15 or 16. And like I said, there's certainly a whole lot of not good stuff in there.
But that's still just a ton of charts, even just.
Yeah.
And I know that you do them in batches. It seems like, at least with the quintet, you just kind of come in with like 6 charts at one time, which was always mind-blowing. So,
Well, one chart leads to another chart. There's kind of a, I don't know. I'll get excited about Horace Silver, and then I'll write 3 or 4 Horace Silver charts, and then I'll get excited about Brecker Brothers. I'll write some Brecker Brothers charts, or Shostakovich, or things like that. One thing leads to another, and you're like, wow, this worked really well. Well, maybe this one would work really well, and then okay, this works great for brass quintet. Would it also work for brass choir, or horn ensemble, or a mixed ensemble, or a concert band, or things like that?
Do you work on different arrangements at the same time, or is it more sequential?
I think I get kind of obsessed in one piece, and I need to finish that one thing before I can get going. Sometimes when I'm contracted or commissioned to do stuff, I'll have a couple things going on at the same time. But I would say generally, I want to get something done, and I want to have that thing completed in my mind before I step on to the next thing.
are there any composers or genres or anything like that that you currently would like to write for, but that you have never done any arrangements of? I guess if you've done 1,000, you've probably covered a whole lot of ground. But is there anybody that you haven't touched yet that you'd be interested in getting to?
Whew, that's a good question.
Thanks, man.
Wow, man. How did you do that? We should sign off.
Well, from the tuba player, no less.
I know. I feel extra bad.
I'm feeling pretty good right now.
I don't think so. Just because mainly when I get something lights my fire, and I feel I go after it pretty hard. So so I don't think there's anything that has that I haven't thought of yet. I mean, there's a lot of things. I always have a lot of ideas about things, and whether if they come to fruition or not, just kind of gets put in a priority list of things, of what's needed for the ensembles that I'm working with or playing with, and then sometimes it's just I'll write things because I want to.
So one thing I once heard, Phil Snedeker, who I'm sure you know or are familiar with at the least, who runs
Great
Washington Symphonic Brass. Yeah, he's one of the best, and he's one of my colleagues at Mason. We were doing a masterclass together, and he said that his mentor told him, whose name is escaping me, but his writing mentor told him that when doing an arrangement, that if you don't have something to say with the arrangement, meaning kind of your own spin on it in some manner, he believes that you shouldn't write it, and so he doesn't really do. It didn't come across. I don't want to paraphrase him as being like anti-transcription, but he seemed to kind of have like an angle that if you don't have an angle, then you shouldn't write it. And it seems like you've always got some very specific thing to say, and so I was just wondering if you could comment on whether you agree with that, and if so, kind of how that manifests itself in your writing.
Well, I certainly can see what he's saying, but sometimes I think the thing that is to be said is simply putting it into a different instrumentation.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the transcription thing, works well just because you're putting in different voices, and the colors that the instruments create something wildly different. And maybe that in of itself is enough to warrant the transcription itself.
I don't know if this is too inside baseball or too cranial, but this is a process question. When you sit down to write a chart, do you tend to start with the melody or the bass line or the harmony, or is it sort of is there a pattern, or does it kind of change every time?
I've actually been asked that a lot because I've had people say, can you give me a few tips on arranging? What would you start with and things like that. And I find that every tune is completely different. There are some tunes where, I start with the melody. There's some tunes that I start with the bass. Other tunes you're thinking about harmony. It just kind of depends. A lot of times the melody is very clear in my head already, so I get to work on the harmonies and the bass lines first, just because the melody is already there. But then there's other times when I think, okay, here's a melody. What can I do with it differently? What is a different spin that I can put on this? And then, so I wish there was a more finite answer, but really every tune comes in is different in its own way and kind of requires a little bit different treatment.
Oh, that's a fine answer, actually. Just
Yeah.
sort of go where the tune leads you.
Well, here's a follow-up question to that, which might be insightful and might not. If say it's a college music major who has never arranged anything in their life, and they are trying to start somewhere, is there an easiest way to just do your first one in terms of starting with melody or harmony or bass?
Well, usually I tell them, start with the melody, see what you want the melody to do. Once you have the melody, once you know what you want the melody to do, then you can usually that does is define a style, and the thing that defines the style is 9 times out of 10 is not the melody but the bass. Whatever you're putting the bass line on, for lack of a better word, the groove that you're going to put out. And I don't mean groove in necessarily a commercial sense. I mean, even classical music can have a groove. And so I think about it in that terms. And for them, think about the melody, what you're going to attribute, what the style is you want to say. That's going to define how you concoct the bass line. And then the bass line, from there, you can start thinking about traditional or more advanced harmonies for what you want to do with the thing. And I think when you first start out, you kind of write in a very vertical manner where everything is melody, bass, and then this homogeneous goo in the middle of it. And I think everybody needs to start that way. It's kind of a choral way of thinking about things, but it's very organized, and you can get things straight in your mind, and then gradually you can lead from vertical harmony, which works sometimes, to horizontal harmony, where you write opposing opposite lines, counterpoint, that when paired with the melody or paired with the bass line kind of creates harmony in passing. And that can be a very cool thing as well. So you start with kind of the choral harmonies of Palestrina and Bach and those kind of things, and then later on you see how like somebody like Hindemith created harmony by the passing of lines. As they pass in the night, they create a harmony that then exists there for a split second. And that can be kind of cool as well as you're constructing these things.
Hey, could you talk about one of my favorite, maybe my favorite chart, at least that I've played of yours, is Autumn Leaves, and I don't remember which Boston Brass disc that's on. Maybe we can put a link to that in the show notes or something.
You got to try.
You got to try. So that is a tune that goes in lots of directions. It's funny because if I see that on an album, I tend to think, oh, brother. Because it's just been done by everybody, and it's usually not very good, and it's campy, and it's like the kind of quintessential lounge tune. And here, it's my favorite chart that you've written because you took it and went in all these different directions about it. So can you talk about the process, or do you remember what went into all that was there? Maybe set up for us what happened in that chart.
Well, I wish I could say the original inspiration was purely my own, but I remember going to a club, a jazz club at one point. I think I was in Chicago, and I heard them play Autumn Leaves, and I remember thinking they started off by playing it in a very classical, almost Baroque style, and I couldn't even tell you what they did, but I just remember when I finally came to Autumn Leaves, I had this idea of like, okay, they started this thing out really classically, so I started thinking, well, what can I do with this thing? And so I started looking at the harmonies, and it was actually very traditional harmonies that the thing went, and so I thought, well, maybe instead of a bass line, what I wanted to do was create a bass line that kind of sounded uh, uh, like one of the ground bass lines from the Baroque era. So I kind of created that, played with it a bunch, tried to get something that sounded very classical, um, and so I had that. So I had this kind of ground bass line in the style of Bach underneath the Autumn Leaves thing, and then I thought, well, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where to go at all, because the thing definitely needed to kind of repeat. But I was like, okay, what needs to happen? So at first I started putting just like harmony in the middle of that thing, and once again, as I said before, it was just kind of this goo in the middle, but didn't make anything interesting. So I thought, well, is there another contrapuntal line that I could put through that? So I introduced the second time having this counterpoint line. Um, and then once we got that and got to the B theme of the tune, then kind of went into jazz style with just a regular jazz bass line. And I started messing with these different rhythms in the middle of the tune, and I remember coming up with in this we were still in 4/4, and then started doing these weird like rhythm shots in the accompaniment. And when I played it on finale, it came through. I was like, that's sort of like the rhythm of Take 5. And so I started looking at the thing, and so started putting the melody over kind of that Take 5 groove, and then even the B theme kind of worked with the harmonies of Take 5. So there's no reason that it goes into Take 5 and or inspiration, other than it kind of came out at one point sort of sounded like Take 5, so I went with it.
Well, that's just cool. I mean, I think a lot of times arrangers get a bum rap, like it's a derivative form. It's not a creative form, and I mean,
It can be. That's for
yeah,
sure.
it certainly can be. Well, when I do it, it is. So
I've been rearranging JD's tunes for years inadvertently.
But it's just
well,
so interesting.
You can't read music, so I understand.
This is true.
It's just interesting to hear where it went creatively, and what those just like any creative endeavor, this spark leads to this other spark. Where the heck did it come from? I have no idea, but it just sort of, you just followed your nose through it, which was the cool part. So the entire opening was composed, yeah.
Yeah, but based on ideas, I went and I looked at some background bass lines, and I took it and said, okay, well, this is sort of like what I'm looking for, and then I would just adjust it slightly to work with what we were doing. So, it's certainly, an arrangement.
Right.
I mean, I would never say that I'm a composer. I can write endings, I can write transitions, I can write things like that. But when it comes down to just sitting down and writing a piece from scratch, they got better people in the world than me to do that.
Yeah, I've played that Autumn Leaves arrangement probably 1,000 times. Not a figure of speech, like probably literally 1,000 times, and I'm not sick of it. That's kind of astonishing. So I think that's kind of a testament to how cool it is. So, so we've got a few questions that were submitted to us online at our Brass Recording Project Facebook page. Not that was a plug or anything. One of them
have you had all your shots? That's the first question.
Yeah. No.
Before I worked with you guys, I had to.
Someone named Jeff Nelson wanted to know if your chop problems are behind you. No, I'm just kidding. Jeff didn't leave us any comments. I'm completely joking. No, the question actually was from someone named Tiffany Hitz, who happens to be my wife. And what she said was that your arrangements have a very distinctive sound, and if you could maybe discuss why that was. What I heard out of that was all of your arrangements sound exactly the same. Why? So, but I told her I was going to categorize it that way, and she did not appreciate that. But I said it would be funny, so I was going to say it anyway, and she said, "Fair enough." So, so you can take her more complimentary version of that question, or mine, whichever you'd prefer to answer.
I think the quickest answer is I'm not exactly sure. other than probably the way that I organize things in a general sense. In I think one of the things when I heard arrangements when I was growing up, and certainly this is no knock on anyone, but I definitely heard, um, I guess for lack of a better word, is a thinness to the orchestration sometimes, and I felt like sometimes the arrangements didn't take full advantage of every instrument. A lot of times I thought it was just basically two trumpet parts and then this harmony underneath. So I think what I wanted to do is create a thing where every single voice was featured somewhat, and that even when there were the big ensemble moments, that there was a contribution from every instrument that kind of created something, hopefully bigger than the sum of its parts. Um, I I think. Um, I guess I like big full voice chords. And so I think early on in my arranging, and I've seen this in other young arrangers arranging, is you tend to voice things too thickly. Um, and but at the same time, I wanted all those wonderful harmonies presented all the time. So I think I kind of erred on the side of making things just a little bit thicker. Because if you're only going to deal with 5 people in the first place, what can we do to create more sound when needed, and then fall back on just the chamber music approach of more transparency at the same time.
One of the things that you said occurred to me that I think one of you're writing for quintet. You've got 5 voices to write for, and a lot of times when we would play charts, or if I've played with other quintets, or I've just listened to quintets, if you basically just have, if there's one interesting part and that's the melody, then I don't need to hear that chart again. But so many of your charts, everybody, all 5 voices have an integral role, and it might be a quote unquote just a background part, but it's interesting in some way. It doesn't do what you expect it to, and I think that's what allows you to listen, give it multiple hearings, because there's stuff that you missed on the first pass. There's so many other things to dive into besides the melody.
Well, I think that's something that I learned from actually studying jazz band charts. Nestico, and Mark Taylor, things like that. Was that you would have this melody going on, and they would certainly harmonize it in an interesting way, which was cool. But then there would be this uh, that the harmony backgrounds were not just whole notes or something like this. There was some rhythmic element to that told you what the harmony was, but also reinforced the style of whatever the tune was as well, and kind of created, since we don't have a drum set or rhythm section going on behind the band, these inner rhythms kind of created the drive of the piece, and bespoke of the harmony that was intended at the same time. So, but it really was looking at jazz band charts and seeing how behind a solo, they would have harmony, but it would always be of a rhythmic nature that kind of kept the thing driving forward.
Very cool.
Very cool indeed. So here's another question from Paul Kasulki, who's our good friend from American Band College.
Hey, Paul.
He wants to
Paul.
know. You guys know he's not on the line, right? Yeah.
What?
All right.
Bye, Paul.
Bye, Paul. How do you let an ensemble shine while writing for full band with that ensemble? So, in other words, he's obviously heard a lot of the quintet with full concert band, done out at Wibbick that you've done for Boston Brass, and so how do you kind of allow for 5 members to shine in front of a whole lot of them behind them?
Well, I think it's actually easier, because with the quintet, with just 5 people, everybody is on task the entire time to produce something. Whereas when you, I remember writing when I was in the band, it'd be like, okay, I can take this brass quintet arrangement and we're gonna write it for brass quintet and band. I was like, okay, here's a whole section that I don't have to play anymore, uh, and I can kind of rest my chops a little bit and let this section take it or this section.
Like
And so I think,
offbeats?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I give those to Lance anyway in the quintet. Um,
What?
oh, if I didn't tell you about that. Okay.
I mean, what?
He was going to notice it in like the eighth year of
what,
playing
what,
your.
what,
Yeah,
what?
oh, good Lord.
Yeah. Hey, whenever I could give somebody else the Sousa farts, I was
Yeah.
happy. Uh, so, but it was actually easier, and because you had just five brass instruments, here was the opportunity to use the woodwind color, the percussion color, the other color. With orchestra, it was using strings. So it actually just opened things up a whole lot more creatively. But it wasn't hard to do because you were thinking, hey man, how about a little rest for for the quintet? And all right, great. Here's another ensemble that can make this thing happen.
All right, here's another two-part question here from our friend Will Houchin, who is an elementary school music teacher down in Arizona, who also does all of our graphic arts design for all of Lance and my projects. So if you need somebody, contact us because he's the best.
Hi, Will.
Hi, Will. Yes, he's not
He's
on the.
sitting with Paul.
Yeah,
Bye, Will.
Bye, Will. They're actually both over at my house, but they didn't want to talk. They're down in the basement playing video games. In the same way
Sorry,
that
he didn't vacuum.
yeah, in the same way that brass players do long tones and other exercises to work on fundamentals, what do you like to do to keep your writing skills sharp? And the second part is, are there things you like to go back to keep your skills as an arranger up?
Well, the first one is if you want to be a good arranger, you just got to arrange, and you have to arrange a lot. Um, I mean, like I said earlier, there was more bad than good when I first started, and it would have been easy to get frustrated and just stop. And there's certainly times when I'm frustrated. Let's be clear, but yeah, you just got to write. You just got to keep doing it until you find something that works for you. And when it does work, man, that's one of the best feelings in the world, and that kind of gets you addicted to write some more and some more. The second part of the question is getting my skills, keeping them honed. I'm always looking at scores. One of my favorite things is just I love looking at scores. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's string quartet, if it's a piano sonata. I'm just a junkie when it comes to looking at scores and seeing how the things are constructed. And very often, like I remember when I wrote the Prokofiev that Boston Brass did with the Tang Quartet, that was something so new, and it was fun to create something different from my creative side. But just sitting there studying Prokofiev's scores was very eye-opening for me because here was I knew all these rules, I knew all these parameters that they'll tell you in all the counterpoint classes and all these things, and here was Prokofiev basically breaking every rule in the book, and it worked so wonderfully. And I can't think of another composer who has such a distinctive sound as Prokofiev. So looking at that and seeing the construction of, okay, here's how this was created, and what were you possibly thinking? So just looking at any particular score that I possibly can, and like I said before, I leave the composition to other people, but you see these techniques and you see how they can work within your own arranging, and it can be something new and something different, and really kind of enlightening.
For just real quick to explain to people that don't know what he's talking about in terms of the Prokofiev that he did for Boston Brass. This was something that he did for Boston Brass after he had left and Chris Castellanos had joined as the horn player. But Lance actually came up with this concept for a concert called Notes from the Balcony, which was an entire concert based around the theme of Romeo and Juliet. And JD did the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet for Boston Brass, and the Tang String Quartet, who are a string quartet in Singapore, who have been dear friends of mine for a very, very long time. And this concert was over in Singapore at the best concert hall in the whole country, and also had piano and percussion. And yeah, you did an absolutely amazing job of that, and Lance, you did an amazing job of coming up with that concept. That's one of the my 5 favorite concerts that I've ever played was that night, and yeah, it's just fantastic writing. So whatever the heck rules Prokofiev broke, you broke the same ones. So because it was great.
I think JD, actually, you were involved with the very early conversations that ended up leading to that.
Cool.
We were talking with the Tang, JD and I, and a couple of the guys from the Tang were just sort of trying to figure out a way to work together. Because that's the thing, on the face of it, it shouldn't work that a brass quintet and a string quartet would be able to work together. And so we were trying to come up with concepts. And
well, I think what happened that was cool was we were able to get the string quartet amplified.
Yeah.
And that kind of opened things up to do a lot more interesting things, rather than having to kind of worry about the innate dynamic differences between the two ensembles. But once we did that, kind of leveled the playing field and really allowed just a lot more creative freedom.
And those Tang boys play with edge too.
Oh yeah,
they do play with edge. So hey, somebody named Steve Polino wants to know what your favorite group to write for is. Is it duo, trio, quintet, brass ensemble, drum corps, orchestra? What is it? Accordion?
There's. I don't think I have a favorite. It's whatever the favorite at that certain moment is. I think it kind of goes in stages. I'll have a big brass choir jag, and I'll write a bunch of stuff for that, or I'll write stuff for quintet, or I'll write stuff for Sam Palafy and I have a group called Cones of Fury that's tuba, horn, accordion, piano, and drums.
See, the accordion came back.
Well, we figured with a horn and tuba, we had to have somebody geekier than us. So
I was about to say, was that a desperate attempt to seem hip?
Yeah. You should have called me. Yep. And ukulele. Come on.
That's where half of Lance's income has come from through his career.
So I think it's whatever it is. It's whatever at the time. I don't think there's anything that I don't like to write for.
What is it now?
Well, right now, because of the season, I'm in the middle of writing for Santa Clara Vanguard, and also getting started on marching band. I usually have 2 marching bands a year. I don't take any more than that, so it's always fun. And so I'm in the middle of that. And I have a great time doing it. I've had people ask me in the past. They say, "Oh, you're this big classical French horn player. What are you doing messing around with drum corps and marching band?" And it's another ensemble to write for, and it's fun. And I like to tell people, hey, these drum corps go out there and they're going to play for 30,000 people. Sitting in an orchestra on a great night, I get to play for 2,000 or 3,000. That's it. So, I mean, these kids are playing for bigger audiences than they'll ever have. So why not write for huge venues? I think it's pretty fun.
What do you charge to do for a marching band show? Like $7,500, something like that?
It depends.
I just wanted to make that awkward, and I succeeded.
Hey, yeah. So did you have something, Andrew? I have another direction I was going to go in. If you
I was going to go in a different direction as well. It'd be a little freaky if it was the same direction. Your directions are frequently more interesting than mine.
Did you guys kiss and make up?
Well, we're not in the same room.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lance.
How difficult? I think probably one of the biggest challenges must be getting permission on some of these tunes. I know in terms of getting things published, that's been an obstacle along the way. How much of that do you have to deal with at this point?
Well, I did that for a while by myself, and man, it was difficult. Getting arrangement permission wasn't the problem. I mean, there's some people you just can't, don't even think about trying to arrange John Williams or Philip Spark or things like that. There's some composers are very protective of their stuff, which that's their right. But the publishing thing has been a bigger problem And it had been like, I remember talking to Hal Leonard at one point, and they I was asking them about a particular arrangement that we had done. I think it was Caravan. And I said, yeah, there's a trumpet. They said, what's the instrumentation? And I said, well, it's two trumpets, horn, trombone, and tuba. And they said, well, we have an arrangement for jazz band that has four trumpets, four trombones. So we already have that. So no, you can't publish that. Uh, so it's been very, very difficult. I've since moved things over to Potenza Music, and with Pat Stuckmeyer's company out of Louisville, and they've started dealing with more of that stuff. I simply don't have the time to deal with that stuff, and I think they have a little bit better clout and people that are kind of that tasked to work on that kind of thing. So more of my charts are coming out on that particular label, but certainly has been a headache.
So that actually leads to the question I was going to ask you, which is, I know that coinciding with the release of the tunes that we just recorded with the Brass Recording Project, which I'm going to get to in just a little bit before we wrap up. But can you tell us about some of your arrangements being released, which I know is happening soon?
Other than Targeted, that I talked to Pat about releasing those particular tunes that we did on the Brass Recording Project. I'm not exactly sure what they're. Basically, I gave them a whole bunch of charts, and I think, and then they're releasing them when they feel the time is right and things like that, and so it fits with their priority. So I actually don't know when what the order of things coming out, other than I know we want to do the release of the charts along with the Brass Recording Project's audio recording.
Fantastic. I know I've in my years of travel since you left the band with Boston Brass, I got tons of questions from people asking where to be able to buy charts from. So I know people are excited to be able to get their hands on some of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was by far the most frequently asked question I remember getting at the table.
Yep. I wish it would just be easy to say, well, here's the charts, but there certainly is legally and financially a lot of issues that unfortunately come into the fray.
Yeah, of course. So can you just kind of tell us a little bit about your experience with the Brass Recording Project session that we just did of your charts?
Man, I tell you what, that was. I've been in recording sessions that have been grueling and taxing and frustrating, and this was by far not even close to that. I think what was interesting was we were all recording because we didn't know what could happen, and it could have all failed, and I think we would have been okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that knowledge freed us up a little bit. And so I really do think, I mean, there was the occasional time we would get frustrated recording a certain passage, but I've never been involved with something that just had so much, just happiness and joy. I mean, having the recording engineer telling us to shut up because we were shucking and jiving so much. I mean, but then you think about it, and you go, no, this needs to happen.
Right.
I mean, the laughter that was going along while we were doing this drove the thing, and I think just the freedom of doing that was really. I came home just so recharged about music in general. I think it's easy in our world to, if you've been involved with it for a lot of years as we have, is to occasionally get down and a little bit cynical about things, and then when you get in a room with four other really like-minded people, number one, it's scary for everybody involved, but
and smelly.
Number
Take
two,
202.
Number two, it's one of the most liberating things. And I just thought it was, how cool was it that we finished all the charts that we wanted to record. So I stayed up till 3 a.m. Then the next night, just putting out more charts. And we would sit down and we would read through the tune, and I remember thinking, no, there's no way in hell we're going to get this tune recorded. And we would just kind of group up a little bit. I'd go with the trumpets or with the with low brass, and we'd rehearse for about 20 minutes, and next thing you know, we were recording the thing, and it was working great.
That was mind-boggling to me.
It,
It just blew me away.
yeah, I
It's
couldn't
all right
believe it.
with me was incredible. I've told that story like 3 or 4 times since then, which is a
I
chart
told
that
it today.
which is a chart that Lance sings on and plays a euphonium solo, and it's kind of an up-tempo thing. It's a simple quote unquote tune because it's like it's one tempo, and there's nothing complicated about it. And we handed it out, and I think it was you, JD, that suggested it, and both Lance and I were like, "Oh yeah, that's great." And I was like, "Oh, it's got singing. It's going to be really interesting. Let's absolutely do that." And then we started reading it, and as soon as we got into it, I remembered that the trumpet parts, neither of which this was played after Rich was in the band, and Jibo has never seen it, and the trumpet parts are ridiculously hard with this soli in the middle with the horn, and I'm instantly going like, "Oh, geez, we should not have done this." And Jibo said, "Just give me 5 minutes with the chart," and then you said, "Actually, can we rehearse it?" And the way my story goes is that I wish that we had like videotaped it, because you guys took about 15 minutes, and it was absolutely textbook how you practice and rehearse a part. I mean, you started slowly, and every single time when one guy played a note longer than the other two in the middle of a really difficult lick, it was noticed. Sometimes it was verbally stated, "Hey, that you were longer there." Other times it went non-verbally noticed, and then it was fixed from that point all the like in permanently. It was fixed, and and then within 15 minutes it was up to tempo and blazing, and then we recorded it in like less than half an hour, and like, okay, next tune. It's like I've never been in an environment like that in my life. It was amazing.
There's no egos. Like it doesn't. You're playing shorter than I am. That doesn't mean I'm saying you're a jerk. It's just we need to line this up. So there was just none of the nonsense you sometimes find.
Well, and I wish I could, we could say we planned it, but it really was just kind of this convergence of ethics, of work ethics, and standards that just said, "Nope, this is it, boom, blam," and it happened. And I just remember getting done. I remember finishing "It's All Right with Me," going, "Man, 30 minutes ago, I just thought there was no way in heck we were going to get this thing done.
How can we politely cut this tune?" Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
and and then I wasn't even able to get that out of my mouth before like there was already a plan that was in place and had already been begun to be enacted. It was pretty amazing. We tried to get 6 tunes done. That was our goal, and we got 11 tunes done. You don't usually double your goal input in a recording session. At least that hasn't been my experience.
And thanks to
we
JD.
count 12 with the singing, right?
Did we get to 12?
The what now?
Oh, that's true. With my with the circus bee.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we did get 12.
We got 12. I forgot about that. And it was a special thanks to Chris Matten, who did the producing and engineering for us. We had a great time giving him a tough time.
Yeah. I don't know how he didn't come out of the booth and kill us several times, but thank you.
Yeah, the Badger was in a booth all the way at the back of the hall, and also a big thank you to Earl Jackson at the Landon School in Bethesda, Maryland, who let us use their facilities, and it was over break. It involved maintenance shutting off the heat for us, but keeping it on right until the last minute so that the building was warm. There's a lot of moving parts in something like this, but when we would get too frisky and get too off course, then the Badger would stand up from his perch where you couldn't see him, and it was like meerkat manner, and he would just then glare at us, and then we would kind of giggle a lot, kind of.
Yeah, well, then it got to be a game. Let's see if we can get the Badger. The Chris Matten's nickname is the Badger. That'll be another podcast as to why.
Well, and trying to get him to stand up so he could see him was, as Jibo put it, he's like a meerkat.
Yeah. Hey, what are you guys doing? Hey, what's going on back there? Cut it off.
My favorite, I think, was when he called a take, and then we all just froze and we didn't make any sound, and waited for him to stand up. It took about 20 seconds. Then he stood up, like, "What are you guys doing?" And then we all erupted in laughter. And he's like, "Oh, I get it. You guys are real clever." So. Yeah, you'd think that we would have gotten 2 charts done, but it turns out it was the exact opposite. So yeah, that was fantastic. So
we do have some video footage of the session, so we'll get that stuff edited together and post it somewhere for you to check out.
And the last person that I wanted to make sure that I went ahead and thanked was my very dear friend Charlie Dirksen, who is a friend from San Francisco, who's a lawyer out there.
Saved the day.
Yeah, he saved the day. Our Kickstarter campaign was going great until it wasn't going great, and then he became the executive producer. He sent me a text after his enormous donation, and in his words, he was pissed off that more people weren't donating, and that he hoped that this was going to kick their butts into gear. And sure enough, the donations started flooding in right after that in the last 2 days, and then we more than met our goal on Kickstarter, and that's all because of Charlie. So thank you to Charlie and Earl and the Badger and JD for your charts and all that. And
and thanks to everybody else who contributed on a Kickstarter as well. I mean,
Yep.
we couldn't have done it. Charlie definitely was the leader of the pack there, but thank you to everybody else who contributed.
It was almost I think it was 88 different people, something like
Really
that.
great.
Who, some of whom, one of my friends, Adam, contributed. It was like less than 2 minutes after it went live, and I sent out a tweet. I had my dad ready to go because he had told me he was going to donate, and Adam was able to donate before my dad was able to, who had already started filling it out. So yeah, it was pretty, which really pissed George off. So no, not at all. So yeah, and everybody can look for the
Hi,
recordings and the other.
George.
Yeah, George is here with Paul and who else?
Will.
Will, yes. Paul, Will, and George are all here. It's like almost the Beatles. Not really. Yeah. Anyway, you got anything else, Lance?
No, I think that's it.
JD, you got anything to plug?
Nope. I'm hoping that everybody loves the project, and we can do it again. Because man, that was some good times, and I think we're going to have a great product to show for it, and people will really enjoy it. So that's it.
Thanks
And
for your charts, man. Thanks for
yeah,
your
absolutely. And thank you also for somehow getting the words homogeneous goo into our first ever episode of the podcast. That was
And then comparing it to a choir. That was the best part. Homogeneous goo, much like a choral sound. That is spectacular.
I didn't think I did that. Yeah, I'm denying it.
Okay.
actually during the podcast recording here. I actually signed
My
up
memory
for.
these days, I don't remember it. So.
Good thing we didn't record it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
a good thing.
tuba player did supposedly hit record, so that's debatable, I'm sure.
I haven't, and you better believe I just looked at the Adderall to see if it was blinking or if it was solid. I was like, oh no, but it's good. So, and I did actually sign up for JD Shaw hatemail@gmail.com while we were taping this. So if you'd like to send him an email about if any of the choral
and to
choral
keep the Love
directors.
Fest going a little bit more, thanks for being the first guest on this podcast. We hope to have many episodes, and it was a treat to have you be the premier guest.
Well, it's an honor to be the debut junkie.
And we haven't asked you yet, but you're actually going to appear on the podcast again in the future. We're going to talk all about your playing career with the orchestras and everything that you've played with. It's pretty remarkable, your resume. And you were what with the Ness and Dorma soloist, right? In '91, right? Is that right? Am I getting
For
it right?
what?
For Phantom? Isn't that your big claim to fame?
I don't remember what happened 2 minutes ago, much less 91.
Yeah, I just know that I was standing next
Hey,
to you.
what's your website, JD? If
Yes.
people want to check out your music or your arrangements or any of that stuff, what's the best way for people to do that?
Best thing to do right now is go to Potenza Music and check things out there. And then other than that, I'm on Facebook, and that's about it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, thank you very much to JD, and thanks to everybody for checking out our first episode of the Brass Junkies. And we'll be coming to you with the regular episodes, so stay tuned. You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to help support the podcast in order to make more episodes like this one possible, please visit pedalnotemedia.com/donate for more details. Also, be sure to check out our latest recording, The Brass Recording Project, at brassrecordingproject.com. The Brass Junkies is produced by Hank Attaway, Austin Boyer, and Buddy Deschler of the Fredericksburg Brass Institute. Executive producers are Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.